Trump's own hand-picked ambassador to Canada just delivered one of the most tone-deaf diplomatic performances in recent history, and it perfectly captures everything wrong with the Trump administration's approach to international relations. Pete Hoekstra, speaking to the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, had the audacity to complain that Canadians aren't passionate enough about America while representing the same administration that has been economically attacking Canada for months.
Prime Minister Mark Carney, meantime, now in Mexico on a big trade trip in the face of Donald Trump's trade war against Canada and Mexico as well. This will be a two-day whirlwind visit, about 36 hours or so. Mark Carney will be in Mexico City as both countries brace for the U.S. planned renegotiation of the continental trade deal that Mexico and Canada have with the U.S. Remember, Mark Carney has long talked about how Canada is one of the best protected countries in the world in terms of a trade deal, because a lot of the trade that goes back and forth across the border is protected under the current deal. If that deal gets renegotiated, then what? That is the question. We also expect Carney to sign a strategic partnership with Mexico's president as well, to cover things like trade, health, agriculture, infrastructure, emergency preparedness, security as well. A lot of this, though.
The context here is crucial to understanding just how absurd Hoekstra's complaints truly are. For months now, Trump has been waging an economic war against America's closest neighbor, imposing crushing tariffs and repeatedly threatening to annex Canada as the 51st state. Yet somehow, his ambassador expects Canadians to greet America with open arms and enthusiasm. Hoekstra stood before Canadian business leaders and essentially scolded them for not being enthusiastic enough about the United States. He specifically targeted Canada's Elbows Up campaign, calling it anti-American. But let's break down the stunning hypocrisy here. The Elbows Up movement didn't emerge in a vacuum. It was a direct response to Trump's relentless attacks on Canadian sovereignty. The phrase elbows up comes from hockey, where players keep their elbows raised to protect themselves from aggressive opponents. It became a rallying cry for Canadian unity after Trump repeatedly threatened to annex Canada as the 51st state and imposed crushing tariffs on Canadian goods. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney used this phrase throughout his election campaign, even filming a viral video with comedian Mike Myers, where both wore jerseys, Myers' reading Never 51, in a clear rejection of Trump's annexation threats. But here's where Hoekstra's complaints become truly absurd. He's representing an ADM administration that has spent months economically bullying Canada, mocking their sovereignty, and treating them as a subordinate territory rather than a sovereign ally. Trump has imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian imports and an additional 10% on energy imports. The economic impact has been devastating. Canadian exports to the U.S. dropped almost 16% after Trump's tariff announcements in April. Yet somehow, Hoekstra expects Canadians to be grateful for this treatment. He defended Trump's tariff agenda by claiming that countries competing with Canada face higher rates, telling Canadians their relative position has improved. This is like a bully telling their victim they should be thankful because other kids are getting beaten up worse. It's economic gaslighting at its finest. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Carney has been taking a completely different approach to international relations. While Trump threatens and bullies, Carney has been working to strengthen partnerships with other nations facing similar pressure. He recently met with Mexican officials to coordinate strategies for the upcoming trade deal review. Both countries are looking to save North American free trade through the USMCA review process, working together to eliminate tariffs before year's end. Carney outlined how Canada and Mexico will strengthen their economic partnership, emphasizing that Canada needed to reinvent its economy, much like it did during World War II.
We are both undertaking massive transformations of our economy. Plan Mexico, Canada strong. Our efforts will be strengthened by working together.
Mexico and Canada want to do more on two fronts. First, work together to save North America-wide free trade by coordinating strategies for next year's review of CUSMA, the trade deal that replaced the original NAFTA 5 years ago.
How do we eliminate these tariffs that we both face prior to the end of the year so that we can have a fruitful discussion on the USMCA future beginning in 2026?
Political analysts have noted that Carney is taking a relationship-based approach to governance, showing Canada is showing up differently in international relations.
governs through relationships to a large extent. And I think when he became prime minister, there was a real sense that he had to try to do some reparations. He had to show up differently, allow Canada to show up differently, especially in the conversation with Donald Trump and with Mexico as well. And I think when we first heard from Donald Trump, the conversations, the threats of tariffs and a trade war and all the rest of it, some of the people responding for Canada, including then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Ontario Premier Doug Ford, didn't have a whole lot of kind words about being kind of put in the same umbrella, put in the same bucket as Mexico, particularly when it came to the issues at the border, just not being happy about that. And so we can see Prime Minister Carney show up. He's a different guy. He's I think, again, letting Canada show up quite differently. And it seems that President Sheinbaum is responding to that, right? She's sort of putting the other stuff in the past and saying, look, happy to start the relationship fresh with Prime Minister.
This stands in stark contrast to Trump's confrontational style. Carney has been working to repair and strengthen ties with Mexico, moving past previous tensions when Canadian leaders were unhappy about being grouped with Mexico regarding border issues during Trump's earlier threats. The best-case scenario for Canada-Mexico relations involves increased bilateral business and strategic cooperation. As one analyst noted, while the leaders want to strengthen their partnership, they're careful not to appear as if they're meeting behind President Trump's back. Instead, they're focusing on mutual opportunities and preparing for upcoming free trade agreement negotiations. Carney has emphasized the need to deepen bilateral relationships between Canada and Mexico beyond just the tariff dispute. He acknowledged that both countries have spent way too much time ignoring each other.
Said she wanted to strengthen maritime trade with Canada. Mexico is in the middle of a huge renewal of its infrastructure, including airports, seaports, and rail. But the Mexicans are concerned that Canada's ports aren't big enough to handle the volume of trade they'd like to see. Adrian, Mexican officials are even talking about becoming directly involved in the expansion of Canadian ports, perhaps even helping to build terminals dedicated to Canada-Mexico trade. Mexico is becoming a wealthier country. It's now the world's 12th biggest economy, and the government here wants to raise the standard of living. President Sheinbaum said this morning she wants to question Carney about Canada's healthcare system with a view to possibly reproducing it here. Adrian.
This recognition has led to discussions about Mexico's infrastructure renewal, including airports, seaports, and rail systems. Mexican officials are even considering direct involvement in expanding Canadian ports, potentially building terminals dedicated to Canada-Mexico trade as Mexico rises as the world's 12th largest economy. The response from Canadians to Hoekstra's complaints has been swift and brutal. Flavio Volpe, president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, perfectly captured the sentiment. When you kick the dog, you can't blame it for snarling back. He called Hoekstra's approach gaslighting 101 and suggested the ambassador needs lessons in proper Canada-US diplomacy. What makes this even more embarrassing for Trump is that Hoekstra previously served as ambassador to the Netherlands, where he gained notoriety for making false claims about no-go zones and politicians being set on fire due to radical Islam. When confronted with video evidence of his own statements, he first claimed it was fake news, then denied calling it fake news. This is the caliber of diplomat Trump sends to present America abroad. The irony deepens when you consider that Hoekstra is listed as a contributor to Project 2025, the controversial blueprint for a second Trump term that many Americans find deeply concerning. So Canada is being lectured about anti-American sentiment by someone who helped craft policies that many Americans themselves oppose. Canadians have responded to Trump's economic aggression in exactly the way any sovereign nation should. They've implemented retaliatory tariffs, reduced travel to the United States, and in some cases, stopped buying American products altogether. This isn't anti-American sentiment, it's a natural response to economic warfare. When Trump calls Canada the 51st state and imposes punitive tariffs, what exactly did his administration expect? The elbows up campaign that Hoekstra finds so offensive has become a powerful symbol of Canadian unity and resistance to American bullying. Mike Myers' appearance on Saturday Night Live, where he revealed a "Canada is not for sale" t-shirt and demonstrated the elbows up gesture, became a viral moment that resonated with millions of Canadians. His subsequent campaign video with Prime Minister Carney, where Myers asked, "Will there always be a Canada?" and Carney responded, "There will always be a Canada," struck a chord because it addressed real fears about American intentions. Hoekstra's complaints also reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of how diplomacy works. Successful ambassadors build bridges and find common ground. They don't show up in foreign countries and lecture the locals about their insufficient enthusiasm for the ambassador's home country. Imagine if the Chinese ambassador to the United States complained that Americans weren't passionate enough about China. The outcry would be deafening. What's particularly galling is Hoekstra's suggestion that using terms like trade war is somehow unfair or inflammatory. Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne used war metaphors when discussing how Canada needed to reinvent its economy, but Hoekstra called this a dangerous place to go. This from a representative of an administration that has repeatedly used military and annexation language when discussing Canada. The economic data tells the real story of Trump's failed Canada policy. Despite Hoekstra's claims that Canada's position has improved, the numbers show otherwise. Canadian businesses are hurting, cross-border trade has declined, and the relationship between the two countries has deteriorated significantly. Prime Minister Carney was forced to drop retaliatory tariffs in an attempt to restart negotiations, but even this goodwill gesture earned only grudging acknowledgement from Hoekstra. Perhaps most telling is Hoekstra's admission that he came to Canada expecting to find a different country, one where citizens would be passionate about the American-Canadian relationship. This reveals a stunning naivety about cause and effect. You can't spend months attacking a country economically and diplomatically, then express surprise when that country's citizens develop negative feelings toward you. The broader implications of this diplomatic disaster extend far beyond Canada. Allied nations around the world are watching how Trump treats America's closest neighbor and longest-standing ally. If this is how the Trump administration handles Canada, a country that shares the world's longest undefended border with the United States and has been America's partner in countless military and economic endeavors, what does that say about how they'll treat other allies? Canadian politicians across the political spectrum have pushed back against Hoekstra's comments. Even Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer noted that Canada has a proud history, and that Canadians will naturally react negatively to foreign countries imposing tariffs and raising ideas of annexation. When you're losing conservative politicians in Canada, you know your diplomatic approach has failed spectacularly. The timing of Hoekstra's complaints is particularly tone-deaf given that Trump continues to make annexation threats. Just recently, Trump told Fox News that Canada was meant to be the 51st state because we subsidize Canada by $200 billion a year, a grossly exaggerated figure that ignores the mutual benefits of trade between the two countries. How exactly are Canadians supposed to feel passionate about a relationship with a country whose president regularly threatens their sovereignty? Hoekstra's defense that Trump's annexation comments can be taken as a term of endearment is perhaps the most insulting part of this entire episode. Threatening to eliminate a nation's independence is not endearing, it's aggressive and hostile. No sovereign country would interpret such threats as friendly. I banter, and the fact that Trump's own ambassador thinks this is acceptable shows how far American diplomacy has fallen. The elbows up movement represents something much larger than just resistance to Trump's policies. It's an assertion of Canadian identity and sovereignty in the face of American bullying. The fact that it emerged organically from Canadian society was embraced by political leaders across party lines and resonated internationally shows that Trump's approach has fundamentally misread the Canadian character. Mike Myers' involvement in the campaign video with Prime Minister Carney was particularly significant because it demonstrated that even Canadians living in the United States felt compelled to speak out. Myers, who holds citizenship in Canada, the US, and the UK, made it clear that you can love Americans while not wanting to be American. This nuanced position seems to escape Trump and his representatives entirely. As this diplomatic crisis continues to unfold, it's becoming clear that Trump's Canada policy has been an unmitigated disaster. Instead of strengthening the relationship with America's closest ally, his administration has managed to unite Canadians across political lines in opposition to American policies. The elbows up movement that Hoekstra finds so offensive is actually a testament to the failure of Trump's approach. The real tragedy here is that Canada and the United States have so much to gain from genuine cooperation. Both countries face similar challenges with China, both benefit enormously from integrated supply chains, and both share democratic values and cultural ties. But instead of building on these strengths, Trump has chosen confrontation and threats, turning a natural partnership into an adversarial relationship. Hoekstra's complaints about Canadian attitudes are ultimately a distraction from the real issue. Trump's failed foreign policy has damaged America's relationships with its closest allies and made the world a more dangerous and unstable place. When your own ambassador has to complain about foreign countries not liking you enough, maybe it's time to examine your own policies rather than blaming others for their entirely predictable responses. The elbows up movement will likely outlast the Trump administration, serving as a reminder that sovereignty and self-respect matter more than economic pressure or diplomatic bullying. Canadians have shown they won't be intimidated into submission, and that's a lesson Trump and his representatives still seem unable to grasp.